I'm here from Enova Community Energy, Australia's first community-owned renewable energy retailer, to add to the case that energy, so long the purview of big companies and big money, can be done differently, using a new model based on community partnerships and consumer participation, and building a stronger, more resilient communities in the process. I know that many of you here are already familiar with the Enova story, but it's worth covering briefly because it's instructive in how communities can drive change. What did I do then? Yep, good. Back in 1314, in our region, the Northern Rivers of New South Wales, people were getting fed up with the lack of government leadership on climate change. What's new, do I hear you cry? The final straw was the attempt to introduce coal seam gas mining into a region dependent on pristine environment and clean water for its key agriculture and tourism industries. It wasn't enough to oppose coal seam gas mining. We needed to demonstrate that it wasn't needed, that we could meet our own energy needs with renewables. So there was increasing demand for locally owned community-scale generation. And the first Coalition of Community Energy conference showed that that was possible. But to make this happen, we needed the equivalent community-scale retailer. The oligopoly of gentailers weren't about to take an interest. So after a year of feasibility study, business plan, retail licence application, prospectus development, and $4 million in capital raising, Enova Community Energy came into being, funded by some 1,100 small investors, 75% from our region, the other 25% from every other state and territory in Australia, because there was so much interest in the model. We established ourselves from the outset as a social enterprise, so that our organisation as a whole has social objectives as its primary objectives. And these are to assist the community to reduce carbon emissions and to be of benefit to the community. And it's made sustainable by operating the retail business. Part of the point of being a social enterprise is to overcome the dispersion of costs that was talked about yesterday, to ensure that the whole community can participate in the shift to renewables, vulnerable and low household incomes included, and not just those who can afford solar PV and increasingly solar and batteries. In our view, the energy future is one of communities powering themselves, together making up a system of systems, to use Audrey Zibelman's expression. Enova exists to respond to our own and other communities, helping to build that decentralised, distributed, digital and much more democratic future, in which communities retain much more of the hundreds of millions currently leaving our regions to apply to social and regional development. From Tasmania's south to South Australia, to Alice Springs, to Gwydir, to Goulburn, from Albury-Wodonga to Healesville, we receive community approaches almost weekly. And our licence and structure means that we're positioned to assist, although our current size means practical limitations. Well, that could be overcome with even a trickle of the funds that currently flow from ARENA to major renewable projects. That's just a by the way. So, as communities tell us, the 20th century centralised model, based on energy flowing one way in, from big power through big pipes to insignificant little households, and money flowing one way out, in the case of the Northern Rivers, approximately 380 million annually, is an obsolete model. Yet it appears that every attempt is still currently being made to preserve it, just slowly replacing big fossil fuel plants with big centralised renewable generation and building some big new pipes along the way. No change whatsoever in the money flows. I've got a new one? Yes. But as we've been hearing for the last day and a half, and as distributors and retailers know, it's increasingly possible to change. Continuing improvements and declining costs in renewable and storage technologies, grid balancing, demand management, and energy sharing and trading technologies make a new approach feasible. It's possible for each region to be largely self-sufficient, with most renewable energy used in a region generated right there and retailed by community-owned retailers. Well, what might such a regional system look like? Well, just for example, say over the next few years we double the solar PV take-up in the Northern Rivers from 30% to 60%, including on vulnerable and low-income houses. We move to a system where households can share energy and streets can share batteries. Households are producers. As producers, partner with their community retailers and distributors. Household or street batteries might be subsidised by retailers in return for use of the energy at peak times, and virtual power plants, nearly there. Community solar gardens, such as those being developed by Enova, allow renters to own panels and benefit from the solar generated. Industrial and residential estates operate as embedded microgrids. Local generation minimises network energy losses. Increased security and resilience come from multiple layers of local delivery and storage sources, with backup if needed from the national grid, but increasingly less reliance on it. Lower replacement and maintenance costs come in for distributors. Where it makes sense for isolated communities and farms at the end of the line can be snipped while maintaining equally good energy supply. A regional model could also be applied to suburbs in cities, with large-scale renewable investment planning focused on supporting industries and being located as close as possible to industry growth areas to maximise security and lower energy losses. Enova is currently working on many of these elements in partnership with others. I don't have time to talk about the changes to the regulatory framework required or the different approach to cost-benefit analysis that should be applied. But I hope that that's given you some flavour of the opportunities for a new approach to markets and services that communities we know across Australia are asking for.